August 16, 1944. Dawn creeps over the scarred fields of Normandy. Dust rises in long, curling plumes as a convoy of trucks snakes through the narrow roads, engines growling in unison. The air smells of diesel, hot rubber, and churned earth. Drivers, mostly young men, wipe sweat from sunburned faces, gripping steering wheels that shake with every pothole and crater. Radios chatter in broken bursts, orders, warnings, updates, while distant artillery echoes across the countryside, a grim reminder of the front lines just miles ahead. The trucks carry the lifeblood of an army, fuel for Patton's tanks, ammunition for advancing infantry, rations for soldiers whose boots are caked in mud. Each mile is a gamble. German reconnaissance planes occasionally streak overhead, indifferent at first, laughing at what they see as a slow-moving convoy of trucks. Yet every delivery shifts the balance of war. Without these supplies, the armored columns of the Third Army would stall, leaving thousands vulnerable to counterattack. This was the Red Ball Express, a chain of wheels and men that became the heartbeat of the Allied advance across France, turning derision into awe and supply lines into unstoppable momentum. The roads were long, the stakes were higher. July 25, 1944. The Normandy blockade lay behind the Allies like a nightmare of hedgerows and shattered villages. For 6 weeks, American, British, and Canadian forces had clawed their way inland, inch by inch, at a cost measured in blood and iron. The beaches of Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword were now memories etched into the minds of every soldier who had survived. Yet the war in Western Europe was far from over. By late July, Operation Cobra, the American breakout from the Norman hedgerows, was underway. The plan was audacious: exploit the German overcommitment to the front, punch through the lines, and drive rapidly across France. For General George S. Patton, the Third Army's commander, speed was not just a tactic, it was a philosophy. Tanks, armored infantry, and mechanized artillery had to roll forward with relentless momentum. Every hour gained meant the difference between encircling retreating German units and giving them time to regroup. But there was a problem that no strategy alone could solve. The Allied advance was outrunning its own stomach. Fuel, ammunition, and food were not arriving fast enough. Roads were clogged with destroyed vehicles, cratered by shellfire, and choked with civilians fleeing combat zones. Allied planners faced a logistical nightmare. Patton's tanks could cover 50 miles a day, but without resupply, they risked grinding to a halt in the French countryside, vulnerable to counterattack. The German army, battered but still capable, had begun to withdraw in disarray. Their units were thinly stretched, communication fragmented. Some German commanders laughed at the thought that a convoy of trucks could sustain a full armored army. They assumed that without heavy artillery support and direct supply depots, the Americans would stumble. Intelligence reports underestimated the potential of rapid, mobile logistics. Meanwhile, Allied supply lines were fragile threads stretching from Normandy's beaches. The ports at Cherbourg and Brest were partially destroyed, limiting the volume of material that could arrive. Rail lines were disrupted by bombings, bridges destroyed, tracks mined. Trucks were left to carry the burden, but even then, convoys could move only so fast without a system to organize them. Every mile beyond Normandy's front lines was a risk. Every delay could stall the Third Army and give the Germans precious time to regroup. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, understood the stakes. The broader war strategy demanded that the Allies maintain momentum. The liberation of Paris, the collapse of German positions in France, and the eventual invasion of Germany itself hinged on one fact: armies march on their stomachs and tanks run on fuel. The failure of logistics could nullify the success of D-Day itself. It was against this backdrop that planners conceived a radical solution: a dedicated, high-speed supply network that could follow Patton's armored columns wherever they went. Speed, efficiency, and relentless coordination would define this lifeline. What began as an improvisation would evolve into the Red Ball Express, a system so vital that even German commanders would come to respect, even fear, its power. As the Allies prepared to push further east, the stage was set. The stakes were clear. The Third Army could surge forward like a hurricane, but only if the roads behind them could deliver. And so, in the summer heat of 1944, an idea was born out of necessity, daring, and the unyielding logic of war. Trucks could win battles if driven with enough determination and organized with enough precision. The Red Ball Express would not just carry supplies, it would carry the promise of victory itself. And it would prove, in the eyes of a mocking enemy, that logistical ingenuity could match, and even surpass, the prowess of weapons and soldiers on the battlefield. As July turned to August 1944, the Allies faced a daunting question: how to keep Patton's Third Army supplied as it raced across France. Traditional supply methods, railroads, depots, slow-moving convoys, could not keep pace with the speed of armored divisions advancing 50 miles or more each day. Bridges had been destroyed, towns were flattened, and the roads themselves were pockmarked with bomb craters. Every delay threatened to halt tanks on open roads, leaving them vulnerable to German counterattacks. The solution came from an unlikely blend of military precision and improvisation. The idea was deceptively simple: a dedicated, continuous convoy system operating 24 hours a day that would shuttle fuel, ammunition, and rations from Normandy to the front lines. It would run on carefully scheduled routes, marked with colored flags, coordinated by radio, and protected by military police. Speed was the priority. Efficiency was essential. Reliability was non-negotiable. Planners at Allied headquarters in France, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower and General Omar Bradley, approved the concept. Their goal was to create a Red Ball route, borrowing the name from a 1940s railroad term used to indicate priority shipments. Trucks would operate in convoys along clearly designated paths, allowing the army to maintain momentum without waiting for traditional supply lines to catch up. In total, the system would eventually employ thousands of trucks and drivers, moving around the clock in a mechanical ballet of logistics. Much of the driving force behind the Red Ball Express came from African-American soldiers, who made up a significant portion of the drivers. Despite pervasive segregation in the U.S. Army, these men proved their skill, endurance, and courage under some of the most grueling conditions imaginable. They drove through narrow roads, navigated bombed-out bridges, and endured heat, fatigue, and the constant threat of German attack. Their efforts were largely unsung at the time, yet they formed the backbone of one of the most remarkable logistical feats in military history. The trucks themselves were as vital as the men behind the wheels. Mostly 2.5-ton, deuce-and-a-half cargo trucks, these vehicles were robust yet temperamental. Constant maintenance was required to keep them running under heavy loads and long hours. Mechanics worked tirelessly along the route, often under difficult conditions, ensuring that breakdowns did not disrupt the flow of essential supplies. Fuel shortages, vehicle malfunctions, and road accidents were constant threats, yet ingenuity and determination kept the wheels moving. Initial operations were met with skepticism. German intelligence, observing the convoys, underestimated their significance. Some commanders reportedly laughed, believing these were merely trucks carrying trivial supplies. They failed to grasp the scale, precision, and relentless pace of the Red Ball Express. Each convoy, however, was a lifeline to the armored spearheads pressing forward, delivering the materials that allowed Patton's tanks to keep rolling and artillery to remain operational. Security along the routes was another challenge. Military police were tasked with preventing accidents, maintaining order, and protecting the convoys from sporadic German attacks. Checkpoints were established, speed limits enforced, and schedules strictly monitored. The system was a delicate balance of discipline and improvisation, with every delay potentially compromising the advance of an entire army. By mid-August 1944, the Red Ball Express was fully operational. Convoys stretched for miles along narrow French roads, engines roaring day and night, the drivers' determination as unyielding as the advancing columns they supplied. The Germans, still reeling from their retreat, began to realize that the Allies had found a solution that could not be easily disrupted. What had started as a pragmatic experiment in logistics was rapidly becoming a critical instrument of war. The Red Ball Express would not just feed an army, it would enable one of the fastest, most audacious advances in modern military history. And in the eyes of the German commanders who had laughed at the sight of tracks on the road, the reality of the operation would soon become impossible to ignore. For the men behind the wheels of the Red Ball Express, every mile was a test of endurance, courage, and willpower. African-American soldiers, many barely out of their teens, drove through sweltering heat and pouring rain, navigating roads that were riddled with craters, debris, and the occasional mine. Sleep was a luxury. Food was sparse. Every moment required absolute focus, because one wrong turn, one stalled engine, could jeopardize the advance of thousands of soldiers depending on them. These drivers became unsung heroes, the lifeblood of an army in motion. Cinematically, the roads stretched like ribbons of steel and dust across the French countryside, a visual testament to human determination. Engines roared continuously, headlights cutting through pre-dawn darkness. Men communicated over crackling radios, shouting instructions and warnings. Convoy after convoy moved like clockwork, each vehicle a single note in an immense symphony of war. Exhausted drivers formed bonds that transcended race and rank, their camaraderie forged in the fire of necessity. They became a network of precision and resilience, each aware that their role, though far from the front lines, was vital to the survival of the army. Tactically, the Red Ball Express was more than a supply line. It was a weapon in its own right. The convoys were organized into strictly scheduled departures, separated by precise intervals to avoid congestion. Routes were clearly marked with colored flags, and military police patrolled tirelessly to maintain order and prevent accidents. Engineers repaired bridges, cleared debris, and improvised solutions when roads became impassable. Every element of the operation was designed to maximize efficiency while minimizing risk, a logistical choreography as precise as any battlefield maneuver. Speed was the critical tactical advantage. Unlike traditional supply lines that relied on rail or slow convoys, the Red Ball Express could deliver fuel, ammunition, and rations directly to the advancing armored units within hours. This allowed Patton's Third Army to maintain a pace that would have been impossible under conventional supply methods. Tanks could roll into engagements fully fueled and armed, artillery could fire without interruption, and infantry could move with the confidence that supplies would meet them. The Germans, observing the rapid advance, began to understand that this was no ordinary convoy. The human element intertwined with tactical precision in unexpected ways. Drivers faced constant danger, not from frontal combat, but from accidents, mechanical failures, and ambushes along the routes. Overturned trucks, crushed wheels, and blown engines were daily hazards. Yet the men adapted, improvising repairs, rerouting around obstacles, and continuing without hesitation. Leadership within the convoy was decentralized. Drivers, sergeants, and platoon leaders made real-time decisions, ensuring that even when disruptions occurred, the flow of supplies rarely stopped. Every mile carried psychological weight. Soldiers on the front lines knew that their survival depended on what rolled behind them. Watching the endless line of trucks arrive with fuel and ammunition became a morale booster, a tangible sign that the army was still capable of advancing, still capable of victory. Conversely, drivers themselves carried a quiet pride, understanding that their labor, often overlooked in official reports, directly enabled success. The human endurance displayed along these routes rivaled that of any combat unit, a testament to courage in its most practical, relentless form. The Germans, for their part, initially dismissed the Red Ball Express as inconsequential. A convoy of trucks, they reasoned, was no match for artillery and tanks. Yet this miscalculation revealed a fundamental tactical oversight. Modern warfare depended not only on firepower, but on mobility and supply. The Allies had turned logistics into a force multiplier, a tactical tool that could sustain rapid, deep penetration into enemy territory. In doing so, the Red Ball Express blurred the line between support and frontline combat, proving that the ability to supply an army quickly and efficiently could be as decisive as any tank or rifle. In the convergence of human endurance and tactical brilliance, the Red Ball Express became a living organism. Drivers, mechanics, military police, and engineers formed a network that kept an army moving at an unprecedented pace. The roads themselves became arteries of war, carrying the fuel, ammunition, and hope that enabled the Third Army to strike deep into occupied France. The human struggle, intertwined with tactical innovation, would soon collide with the reality of German realization, a moment that would change the course of the campaign. Beneath the roar of engines and the tireless rhythm of human determination lay another layer of the Red Ball Express, technology. The backbone of the convoy was the 2.5-ton deuce-and-a-half truck, rugged and versatile, capable of carrying heavy loads over roads pocked by war. Yet these trucks were far from indestructible. Constant maintenance was required. Engines overheated, tires blew, brakes failed, and axles cracked under the relentless strain. Mechanics worked alongside the convoys, improvising repairs in the field, often using salvaged parts from disabled vehicles. Their work was invisible but indispensable. Without it, the arteries of the Allied advance would have clogged and stalled. Radio communication was another technological lifeline. Drivers and platoon leaders relied on crackling frequencies to coordinate departures, reroute around obstacles, and report breakdowns or enemy sightings. The technology was rudimentary by modern standards, but in the chaos of war, it was revolutionary. Real-time coordination allowed convoys to maintain speed, avoid congestion, and respond immediately to emergencies. Even small failures, a dead battery or a miscommunicated order, could ripple across miles of moving vehicles, threatening the entire operation. Leadership was equally crucial. General George S. Patton, known for his aggressive tactics and relentless drive, demanded speed above all else. His orders pushed the Third Army forward at an almost reckless pace, trusting that logistics would keep up. At headquarters, Generals Eisenhower and Bradley monitored the broader strategic picture, understanding that supply chains were no less decisive than armored divisions. They delegated authority to logistics officers who oversaw the Red Ball Express, ensuring that schedules were maintained, routes were cleared, and resources were distributed efficiently. Patton's leadership style, blunt and demanding, permeated the convoy system. Drivers were expected to follow strict schedules, maintain discipline, and keep moving regardless of obstacles. Yet within this rigidity, there was room for improvisation. Platoon leaders and sergeants made split-second decisions when roads were blocked, vehicles failed, or enemy patrols appeared. The decentralized nature of command within the convoys was a practical response to unpredictable conditions, allowing the system to function as a flexible, self-healing organism. Technology and leadership intersected in critical ways. Convoys had to be timed to the minute, vehicles maintained to the highest standard under wartime conditions, and radio networks kept all units synchronized. Any lapse could halt the flow of supplies and imperil the front lines. Yet under the guidance of capable leaders and skilled mechanics, the Red Ball Express not only survived these challenges, it thrived. The convoy system became a tangible demonstration of how technology, human skill, and leadership could combine to achieve results that neither could accomplish alone. The psychological impact of leadership extended beyond the convoys themselves. Soldiers on the front lines knew that orders from Patton were backed by an operational lifeline. Confidence in supply fostered aggression and audacity. Tanks could press forward without fear of running dry, artillery units could fire relentlessly, and infantry could advance with the assurance that provisions would follow. Leadership, therefore, was not just about giving orders. It was about instilling trust that the machinery of war behind the lines would function flawlessly, even under extreme pressure. The Germans, who had initially mocked the convoys, began to grasp the significance of this integrated system. They saw trucks moving faster than anticipated, maintained in near-perfect condition, protected by disciplined planning, and supported by real-time communication. Their misjudgment, believing that logistics were trivial, would have consequences. They could not stop the flow, could not disrupt the supply line, and could not prevent the Third Army from striking with speed and precision. In the end, the Red Ball Express was more than a convoy of trucks. It was a network of technology, leadership, and human resilience, perfectly synchronized to sustain an army on the move. It transformed mundane elements, diesel engines, spare parts, and road signs, into instruments of war. It proved that ingenuity and organization could amplify human effort to extraordinary effect. And as the Third Army surged deeper into France, this combination of mechanics and command would soon meet the moment of truth, a turning point that would define the speed, strength, and success of the Allied advance. August 22, 1944. The sun rose over the rolling fields and shattered villages of northern France. Patton's Third Army had broken free from the confines of Normandy, moving east at a pace that stunned both allies and enemies alike. Tanks thundered across open roads, infantry surged forward, and artillery pounded retreating German positions. Behind them, the Red Ball Express roared, a continuous line of trucks, engines screaming, dust swirling in their wake. At its peak, the convoy stretched over hundreds of miles, a mechanical river of fuel, ammunition, and rations. Every vehicle had a role, every driver a responsibility that could not be shirked. Convoys departed around the clock, guided by colored flags and radio orders synchronized with astonishing precision. A delay in one link could ripple across the entire system, yet the network held firm. Bridges were repaired overnight, roads cleared of rubble by engineers who worked tirelessly under extreme conditions. Trucks carried more than supplies, they carried the momentum of the Allied advance. The impact on the battlefield was immediate. Tanks arrived at river crossings with full fuel tanks, ready to spearhead attacks. Artillery units could maintain continuous barrages, pounding German positions, while infantry followed with barely a pause. Commanders on the front lines watched the convoys arrive and understood the significance. The Red Ball Express was not just moving supplies, it was enabling speed, surprise, and relentless pressure that the enemy could neither anticipate nor resist. German reconnaissance planes noted the constant flow of trucks, initially dismissing them as logistical noise. But as the weeks passed, it became impossible to ignore. Every attempt to disrupt the convoys through ambushes, artillery strikes, or sabotage failed. Military police patrolled rigorously, and drivers, conditioned by long hours and exhaustion, navigated obstacles with uncanny precision. The Allies had created a supply network that was simultaneously disciplined, flexible, and relentless. August 25 marked a critical moment. Patton's forces approached the outskirts of Paris. Fuel and ammunition from the Red Ball Express allowed armored divisions to outflank German positions, bypassing heavily defended points and striking where the enemy was weakest. Infantry moved in tandem, supported by artillery, securing towns and villages without halting for resupply. Each mile gained, each German stronghold bypassed, underscored the strategic value of the convoy system. The human toll was immense. Drivers worked in rotating shifts, often for 24 hours or more without proper rest. Trucks broke down under heavy loads, tires shredded on debris-strewn roads, yet the pace never slowed. Mechanics repaired vehicles in the field, sometimes under fire. Platoon leaders rerouted convoys around obstacles. The system functioned because human resilience met precise coordination, a combination that German commanders had failed to anticipate. By early September, the Red Ball Express was delivering more than 12,500 tons of supplies per day. Fuel, ammunition, and rations flowed continuously from Normandy to the front lines, enabling Patton's Third Army to maintain an advance that seemed almost impossible. German units, still reeling from the Normandy defeat, scrambled to respond. Their intelligence reports noted the speed of the advance, the persistence of the convoys, and the logistical ingenuity that made it possible. Yet, despite their recognition, they could not halt the flow. The Red Ball Express became a lifeline not just in a logistical sense, but strategically. Its success allowed the Third Army to maintain operational tempo, striking deep into France, encircling retreating German units, and liberating towns in rapid succession. The momentum generated by the convoys created a psychological shockwave, leaving German commanders increasingly desperate and reactive. Every mile covered by a tank, every artillery barrage delivered on schedule, was a testament to the unseen yet indispensable force of the trucks and the men who drove them. In these weeks, the Red Ball Express reached its zenith. It was no longer just a supply system, it was a decisive instrument of war. The convergence of human endurance, tactical planning, technological reliability, and leadership precision had created an unstoppable mechanism. What German commanders had once mocked now dictated the pace of battle. The convoy system had transformed from an improvised solution into a strategic force multiplier. As Patton's armored columns surged forward, fueled and armed by the relentless rhythm of the Red Ball Express, the Germans realized the full scale of their miscalculation. The laughter that greeted the sight of the trucks in early August had faded. In its place was urgent assessment, desperate countermeasures, and the bitter recognition that logistics, properly executed, could outmatch strategy, firepower, and even courage on the battlefield. The Red Ball Express had reached its apex, and with that realization came the turning point, the moment when the Germans understood that the pace of Allied advance could no longer be interrupted, and the war in France was slipping irreversibly from their grasp. September 1, 1944. The German High Command watched in disbelief as Patton's Third Army tore across northern France. The speed of the advance defied their expectations. Reports trickled in, armored divisions striking deeper than anticipated, towns liberated with minimal resistance, German units forced into chaotic retreats. At first, many dismissed the Red Ball Express as a minor logistical operation, incapable of sustaining the pace of modern mechanized warfare. But the reality was undeniable. The trucks were not merely carrying supplies, they were sustaining an army in motion, and nothing the Germans could throw at them seemed able to halt it. The Germans attempted to adapt. Reconnaissance patrols harassed the convoys, strafing vehicles and targeting key routes. Artillery positions were redeployed to shell chokepoints along the main supply lines. Sabotage teams attempted to destroy bridges and crater roads, yet the Allies had anticipated such threats. Military police patrolled constantly, clearing debris, coordinating repairs, and maintaining discipline within the convoys. Engineers worked night and day to rebuild bridges and clear obstacles. The system was resilient, flexible, and relentless. German attacks disrupted little, and each failure only underscored the efficiency of the operation. By September 3, it became clear that the Allies had achieved more than tactical brilliance. They had gained operational superiority. The Third Army could strike where the Germans least expected, unburdened by the delays that typically slowed advancing forces. Fuel, ammunition, and food flowed with clockwork precision. Armored columns moved faster than German units could respond, artillery positions were continuously resupplied, and infantry followed with unwavering momentum. The psychological impact on German commanders was profound. Their calculations of Allied capabilities had been flawed from the start. The liberation of Paris on August 25 had been a dramatic milestone, made possible not only by audacious tactics, but by the silent, invisible force of the Red Ball Express. Convoys had delivered fuel for tanks that breached German lines, ammunition for artillery that suppressed resistance, and food for soldiers pressing forward without pause. The speed and efficiency of these operations rendered German attempts to regroup ineffective. For the first time, the full scale of Allied logistical innovation was visible on the battlefield. Patton's leadership amplified the impact. His orders demanded continuous advance, and he trusted that the Red Ball Express would meet the Army's needs. Eisenhower and Bradley provided the strategic oversight, ensuring the supply lines aligned with broader operational goals. Meanwhile, the drivers, mechanics, and engineers executed flawlessly, often improvising solutions under intense pressure. Each element reinforced the other. Leadership drove ambition, technology enabled speed, and human endurance ensured reliability. Together, they created a force the Germans could not anticipate. By early September, German forces recognized a bitter truth. Stopping the Allies required more than superior weapons or tactical positioning. The Red Ball Express had neutralized one of their greatest advantages, time. With every hour that convoys delivered fuel and ammunition, the Third Army gained distance, momentum, and initiative. German units were forced into reactive positions, constantly retreating, and unable to mount coordinated counterattacks. Every failed attempt to disrupt the supply lines deepened their desperation. The human cost was evident on both sides. Convoy drivers endured exhaustion, heat, and mechanical hazards. German soldiers faced relentless pressure, their retreating forces increasingly disorganized. Civilians watched the advancing army, aware that the trucks behind the tanks ensured continued liberation. The Red Ball Express, though largely unseen by history's casual observers, had become a decisive instrument of operational warfare, its significance matched only by the courage and skill of the men who kept it moving. By mid-September 1944, the consequences were clear. The Third Army's momentum could not be stopped. The Germans had been forced into strategic withdrawal, losing towns, artillery, and vehicles to a relentless advance sustained by logistics. The Red Ball Express had turned what many had dismissed as a minor support operation into a decisive factor in the liberation of France. Laughter at the sight of trucks had been replaced by urgent reassessment. The Allies' ability to move faster, strike deeper, and sustain the pace of combat was a direct result of the tireless men, precise planning, and technological ingenuity behind the convoys. The turning point was complete. The Red Ball Express had not only fed an army on the move, it had enabled the collapse of German defensive strategy in northern France. The speed of the advance, the coordination of supply, and the resilience of its human and mechanical components created a synergy that German commanders could neither match nor counter. In the eyes of those who had laughed at its inception, the Red Ball Express had become a symbol of Allied ingenuity, determination, and the hidden power of logistics in modern warfare. And as the Third Army pressed eastward, fueled and armed by this unstoppable lifeline, the stage was set for the aftermath, a reckoning of losses, gains, and the enduring legacy of a convoy system that changed the course of the war. By mid-September 1944, the landscape of northern France had been irrevocably transformed. The Red Ball Express had delivered more than 12,500 tons of fuel, ammunition, and supplies per day at its peak. Tanks rolled without pause, artillery fired relentlessly, and infantry advanced with unbroken momentum. The German army, which had initially laughed at the sight of trucks on the road, now confronted the harsh reality. Their defensive positions were crumbling, their units scattered, and their ability to counterattack sharply diminished. The liberation of towns and villages was accelerating. Key cities fell not through prolonged siege, but through rapid encirclement enabled by the continuous supply of fuel and ammunition. The Third Army's operational tempo, maintained by the convoys, left German forces in perpetual retreat. The psychological impact on both sides was stark. Allied soldiers witnessed the fruits of an efficient, tireless system that kept them supplied and confident. Morale soared as each convoy brought rations, fuel, and ammunition within hours of need. Conversely, German soldiers, constantly on the back foot, faced growing despair. Their inability to disrupt the supply lines underscored a fundamental vulnerability. Speed and endurance in modern warfare could be dictated by logistics, not just firepower. The human element of the Red Ball Express was recognized, if quietly. Drivers, often young African-American soldiers, endured extreme fatigue and perilous conditions to keep the army moving. Bridges were repaired overnight, vehicles maintained continuously, and convoys ran through night and day. Casualty reports for conv personnel were relatively low compared to frontline infantry, but the strain and risk were immense. Many suffered from exhaustion, accidents, and exposure, yet their work directly influenced the battlefield outcomes. These men were the invisible engine of the Allied advance. Operationally, the Red Ball Express proved that an army's ability to advance was only as strong as its supply lines. Armored divisions that might have stalled in the absence of fuel surged forward instead. Artillery units maintained a near-continuous barrage, softening German defenses. Infantry moved in tandem, knowing they could rely on timely resupply. Every successful delivery was a tactical victory, allowing commanders to exploit opportunities and press advantages that would have been impossible under conventional logistical arrangements. Statistical evidence reinforced the impact. Over the course of its operation, the Red Ball Express, transporting approximately 412,000 tons of supplies along more than 8,000 miles of route. This extraordinary output kept the Third Army operationally independent, able to strike ahead of supply limitations that had historically slowed advances. German reports noted the continuous flow of trucks and the Army's unrelenting pace. highlighting a growing realization that conventional countermeasures were insufficient. The Germans had underestimated the ingenuity, discipline, and endurance of the Red Ball Express. Attempts to intercept convoys yielded little result, and German forces were forced into increasingly reactive positions. By the end of September, the operational advantage had shifted decisively. The Red Ball Express had not only sustained the Third Army, but had actively enabled the collapse of German defensive strategy across northern France. For the Allied command, the immediate effect was clear. Patton's forces could continue to advance at a previously unimaginable pace. Strategic objectives, such as the liberation of Paris and the rapid penetration into central France, were achievable without the delays and vulnerabilities that traditionally plagued mechanized offensives. The Red Ball Express demonstrated, in real time, that logistics was no longer a background function of war. It was a central, decisive factor in operational planning. The immediate aftermath was a testament to the combined power of human endurance, technological reliability, and disciplined leadership. The trucks, the drivers, the mechanics, and the planners had collectively turned a precarious advance into a coordinated surge. And as the Third Army pushed further eastward, the consequences of their success were about to ripple into the larger strategic picture, the long-term lessons, psychological impacts, and doctrinal changes that would define modern warfare. As the Third Army pressed deeper into France, the Red Ball Express became more than a wartime expedient. It became a blueprint for modern military logistics. Its success demonstrated that speed, coordination, and relentless organization could amplify the combat power of an army far beyond what traditional supply methods allowed. Military planners across the Allied command recognized a fundamental truth. Logistics could determine the tempo of operations, the survivability of units, and, ultimately, the outcome of campaigns. The human legacy of the Red Ball Express endured as well. The African-American drivers who had carried the lifeblood of the Third Army proved their skill and resilience under the harshest conditions. Their contributions, often overlooked in official histories at the time, highlighted the vital role of those behind the front lines. Mechanics, engineers, and convoy commanders also left an indelible mark, demonstrating that innovation, adaptability, and sheer determination could overcome the most formidable logistical challenges. In a war dominated by firepower, it was organization and endurance that had enabled victory. Strategically, the Red Ball Express forced a re-evaluation of operational doctrine. Military theorists and commanders observed that the speed of an advance could be dictated not only by tanks or infantry, but by the efficiency of supply networks. The lessons learned in northern France informed post-war planning for rapid deployment forces, airlift operations, and mechanized army logistics. The operation revealed that a well-coordinated supply line could turn a tactical advantage into an operational and strategic one, reshaping how modern armies would approach mobility and sustainment. The Germans, who had initially underestimated the convoy, faced a harsh lesson in modern warfare. Logistics, often dismissed as secondary to combat power, had proven decisive. The inability to disrupt supply lines meant that even disciplined and experienced troops were rendered ineffective when the enemy maintained speed, flexibility, and endurance. The Red Ball Express illustrated that control of the battlefield depended as much on fuel, ammunition, and food as on tanks and artillery, a concept that would resonate through military planning for decades to come. Culturally and symbolically, the Red Ball Express represented ingenuity under pressure. It transformed mundane trucks and spare parts into instruments of war, turning what many saw as a minor support function into a strategic force multiplier. The operation became a testament to the power of coordination, leadership, and human endurance. The convoys demonstrated that heroism was not confined to the battlefield. It existed in the silent, relentless drive to keep an army moving, in the tireless work of drivers, and in the ingenuity of those who kept wheels turning under impossible conditions. By the end of 1944, the Red Ball Express had concluded its primary mission. Yet its legacy endured. The lessons it offered, about speed, organization, and the human element of logistics would inform military operations in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Historians would later recognize the convoys as a turning point in the operational art of war, a moment when supply lines became a decisive instrument, and when the unsung heroes behind the scenes ensured that victory could march across a continent. The Red Ball Express left an enduring mark, not only on the liberation of France, but on the understanding of warfare itself. It proved that modern combat relied on more than tactics and weapons. It depended on the seamless integration of human effort, technology, and leadership. In the highways and byways of northern France, an army had moved faster than anyone thought possible, sustained by a network of trucks, men, and determination. And in doing so, it reshaped history, teaching lessons that would echo in every military campaign to follow. In the dust and heat of northern France, long after the last convoy rolled to its destination, the Red Ball Express left a legacy far greater than the tonnage of supplies it carried. It was a story of human endurance, of young men navigating treacherous roads day and night, often overlooked by history, yet sustaining an entire army on the move. They drove not for glory, but for necessity, transforming trucks into instruments of survival and triumph. The operation revealed a truth that would resonate far beyond 1944. War is not won solely on the battlefield, but also in the quiet, relentless work that keeps armies moving. Fuel, ammunition, and rations, the ordinary, tangible necessities of combat, became extraordinary in their impact. Leadership, technology, and human perseverance converged along narrow roads, in makeshift repair stations, and through crackling radios, producing a force multiplier invisible to those who measured power only in tanks and artillery. For the Germans, the Red Ball Express was a humbling lesson. What had been dismissed as a convoy of trucks became an unstoppable engine of strategy, outpacing their ability to respond, outlasting their assumptions, and redefining the tempo of war. The laughter that greeted the first convoys gave way to urgent recognition. Logistics, executed with skill and determination, could be as decisive as any battlefield maneuver. Beyond strategy and statistics, the Red Ball Express speaks to the enduring power of human ingenuity. It was a testament to adaptability, courage, and the quiet heroism of those whose work was rarely seen but deeply felt. The roads they traveled were arteries of history, carrying not only fuel and ammunition, but the momentum of liberation itself. In the end, the Red Ball Express reminds us that every victory relies on unseen hands and steadfast resolve. It was not the loud roar of guns or the flash of tanks that defined the advance across France. It was the steady, unyielding movement of trucks, the skill of their drivers, and the vision of those who understood that an army could march only as far as its supplies allowed. And in that lesson, the essence of the Red Ball Express endures. History is shaped not only by those who fight, but by those who sustain the fight, mile after relentless mile.